good. I think I skipped last week. I don't remember. Pretty sure I skipped last week, actually. I think I skipped last week because I couldn't get the streaming to work. So anyway, sometimes our realities get closed out because it wasn't time to stream, or what I was going to stream actually probably worked better as a video. So I didn't do it. But I am back. I do want to get into the concept of change today. So we're going to kind of work that in, because it was something I was thinking about the other day, about there's a lot of different sayings, you know, and they have a thread in them that they work for both soul realities and human realities, but sort of in a flip in a different way. But they still kind of have the same meaning, just you know, it flips, but it's still relevant. That's the word I'm looking for. That's it, relevant. They're still relevant. Like, don't count their chickens before they hatch. Now, in human realities, it means kind of the same thing. You know, you don't plan on something until it's here. In soul line realities, it's the same thing, but it even goes kind of a step further, because if you start planning on that reality, telling people about that reality, bragging about that reality that's coming in, it can shift the whole frequency of the reality so it doesn't come in, right? So when we start to look at these sayings, these catchphrases, and look at them from our soul aligned realities and that consciousness, we start to understand why it also has the same effect on a human reality. It's the energetics that's playing a part in that, you know. It's not so much a jinx. You know, in our human realities, we would say, oh, it's a jinx. I jinxed it. You know, I talked about it and I jinxed it. And that's the human consciousness of it. But in reality, we go more into an ego mode when we talk about a reality that's not here yet. And when we do that, we shift the frequency of ourselves back into more of our human aspect, more of our human frequency, our ego's frequency, which is much lower than where the reality was coming in at. So the reality is not here anymore, because we're no longer in a frequency where that reality exists. So the reality gets taken away. So the saying kind of works in both ways. You know, it works in both genres, both worlds, both dimensions. You know, it works in the higher dimensions, and it holds true in the lower dimensions, because the energetics is what you're looking at. It's not so much the phrase, it's the energetics of what's actually going on that makes the phrase up. So the concept of change comes up quite a bit. You know, the concept of change is constant, right? Everyone will say that. You know, you can't really get away from change. So when I talk about getting stuck in realities, and when I talk about resisting change, when I talk about not changing ourselves, sometimes I get some pushback on that, where people say, no, but you can't stop change, because it's a constant, you know, it's a constant variable. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about how that can sway, and how what we think is change really isn't change, and what type of change are we talking about. We're going to also get into a little bit of how the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, and we're going to talk a little bit about that saying, and see how we can break that one down. Pretty much any phrase that is known in the human realities has a reasoning of why it happens that way. You know, why it comes out that way, why it doesn't work, why is that saying a saying, why do so many people say that, you know, why am I doomed to repeat the same thing? What is the other saying? If you don't learn history, you're going to repeat it. It's the same thing. If you don't learn from these realities you create, and learning, if you take it in the soul line realities, if you don't shift your frequency, if you don't clear that reality, if you don't understand why you were in it and why it didn't work, you're going to repeat the same one again. You know, so we have kind of what humans will look at as artificial change as actual change. Now, if you break it down to the lowest level, technically you're never at the same frequency. So technically you're always changing. Technically you can't stop that. But it's not a change that's enough for you to register, oh, this has really changed. It's kind of the same energetics flowing through all the reality, so has it really changed? Or is it just the same thing again? And I think it's changed because the people look different. Or I think it's changed because I moved to a different location. So is this really different? Or is it kind of the same thing playing out all over again? And why is that? Why can't I really get to real change? Why do I feel like nothing is really changing? Because the other side of that is the term that nothing ever changes, right? That's another human saying people will say, well, nothing ever really changes. People don't really change. Lepers don't change their spots. It's always going to be kind of the same thing. And that's more ingrained in why our human believes that. Our human believes that things can't change. Because unless our human changes its frequency, it really cannot change. And what we look at as change is superficial change. It's not a real change. It's just kind of putting lipstick on a pig kind of change. It's kind of the same thing. But because people are a little different, location's a little different, maybe I'm getting paid more money to work at this job, so it's a little different. I got a different title, it's a little different. I have different clients, it's a little different. But is it really that different? Because one of the things I'll always say is a human does not want to change. And I will always say, I always get pushback on that, because some people say, oh gosh, I love change. Change is the best thing. But soul-aligned reality change and changing within human reality change are two completely different types of change. Changing within a reality is just sort of moving around in the same energetic bandwidth, right? You're still in a human reality. You're still going through human systems. You're still dictating from human beliefs what this reality is going to be like. You're not changing your dimension. You're just changing. You're moving the chairs around on the Titanic. Over and over and over again. It just takes a long time for this Titanic to sink, depending on the reality and how long you've been in it. So you just keep moving things around. But there's no real change. Like, what's the real change? That's probably the biggest thing. Even if we get out of one karmic reality, we get right back into another one. Even if and this is all within those human realities, we get the illusion of change. But there's no real change here. It's just moving things around. It's, it's rearranging. It's taking the sum of the parts. We're going to break it down, right? And now we're going to take the sum of the parts that made up that reality, and I'm going to kind of rearrange them over here. So they seem a lot different. It seems different, but it's kind of still the same. That is why a lot of them are the same. Because we don't ever give the realities time to reset in our human consciousness, because we don't want the vacancy in the reality. We don't like to not have a lot to do. And human realities are based on having a lot to do. It's having a lot to consume. We want to consume. We're over-consumers, We are the only species on the planet that completely fucks every other species over, so we can have more and 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 more. We're the only species that does that. We will screw over ourselves. We'll screw over every other species on the planet, so we can have really expensive cars. We can all have 5 cars apiece. We can have these huge homes when there are other homes we could just remodel, that already exist. We're going to tear down. We want to tear down wildlife to build new ones, because I don't want that one. I want this one. And to keep the economy going, we're going to keep pumping more money. We're going to focus on everyone has to have a cell phone. Everyone has to be able to be connected all the time. And we're going to start putting more pollution in the environment to achieve that, so we can live a better life and fuck everybody else. And that is one of the most corrupt parts about the human reality that you start to see. You start to understand that, yeah, we're kind of the worst thing on the planet. And if we think otherwise, if we think we're the savior of this storyline, we are the villain of this storyline. Our human consciousness and that human collective, with that mentality, and it's such a selfish mentality, which you don't really see till you get out of those mentalities of how selfish it is. Why does everyone have to have a car? Do we really need this many cars on the highway? Do we need this much pollution? Do we need all these things? We don't need all these things. But because we want to be more comfortable, what we want, and that bar continues to change. We continually see that bar change about what everybody else wants. We just want more and more and more and more. And we don't care about anything else on the planet. We don't care about global warming. We don't care about any of these terms that get thrown out that say, oh, maybe we should slow down. We don't care. Now, the flip side of that, this is kind of off topic, but I think it'll kind of tie in at the end, I think. The flip side of that is the earth is changing on purpose. Everyone worries so much about Mother Earth, but she will be able to recorrect whatever she wants to correct in the sense of who's on the planet and who's not on the planet. But when you start really looking at all the things we do consistently, we are not the heroes in the story. Our human consciousness is not the hero in this story. And you can look around and see all the waste, all the selfishness, all that we do that pushes us forward that absolutely just completely screws everybody else. You know? Where there's no reciprocity. I don't think I'm saying that right, and I can't even really get the cadence of that. We don't reciprocate. We just take. And that's the human consciousness. So when you look at us consuming a reality, it's kind of the same thing. The minute the reality doesn't work for us, we're going to try to shift out of it and get to one that works for us better. Because it's not, the one we're in currently, in our human consciousness, is not fulfilling what we want it to fulfill. It's not giving us something. It's not giving us the money, the status, the recognition. We don't feel loved in this reality. We don't want to live in this place anymore. We want to live in a different place. There's a reason why we're going to shift in and out of different ones, but it's always for our own self-perseverance, in a sense. It's going to be for our own self because we just want something else. Our human consciousness does not have the ability. It does not have the access. It does not have the vision to look really at what's going on and see, wow, I understand why this isn't working, and it's not why I think it's not working. Human consciousness blames it on everybody else. We can sit there and point the finger at every other human on the planet that's living in a human consciousness and say, you're the reason why, you know, everything's a mess in the whole world. You know, you're the reason why we're overdoing this, when we're doing the same thing. So you find the human-based realities, they're very blaming realities because that's what we do when we're in them. And we all did that when we were in them. We want to blame everybody else. When stuff goes wrong, I want to blame everybody else on these realities. I don't want to blame myself. You know, I'm going to blame everybody else. I want to continue to blame everybody else because that, to me, makes me not have to look at the reality. And the more we don't have to look at the reality, the more we can just continue to go through realities. But they really don't change. They, like I said, the change is so small that it doesn't even register. It's funny. Let me put it a different way. It registers for the human consciousness as a big change because something outside has drastically changed. Our frequency, though, registers it at a very small change. That's why you will spend 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years in human realities and then get into your awakening, then get into your ascension and really start to see a lot of change when you start changing the frequency of what your body's at. Your consciousness raises. It starts pulling up your body's frequency. You start getting into different realities. And the big shift here is you notice that my soul-aligned realities don't look like my human ones do. And that's very confusing for a long time for a lot of us because we're expecting them to look a certain way. We're expecting to look successful, a reality successful, based on what a human reality would look like if it was successful. Whether it be money, recognition, status. That's what we're looking for in the beginning because we don't know any better. It's the only thing we know. We want to continue to overconsume. We want to continue to be a plague, in a sense, on the planet. That's what we want to do. So we continue to do that. And we take all these realities and we judge them on that, and it takes us a while to realize, well, they're not supposed to be that way. They're not supposed to look like that. We're not doing this for money, fame, status. That's not why we do any of the stuff that we were doing. I'm constructing a reality around peace, love, joy, consciousness. Consciousness is not human consciousness. That's kind of unconsciousness. That's what human consciousness is, because if we really looked at what we were doing, we would see that we're basically on a reality that at some point is going to implode. It will not be supported. It cannot be supported. At a certain point, everything will be gone. But the funny thing is, we're so worried about our day-to-day and that consciousness, we don't care. We don't care. It does not matter to us how it happens. And you can look back in history and kind of see that. You can look back in history and see all the times realities are clearly misaligned. They're clearly not soul aligned. They're even skewed on a human aligned way. Where these look a little shady if you look at them through a human lens because they're so distorted. And it's distorted if a human looks at it from a human consciousness and said this is distorted. You're at a whole different level of distortion when a human consciousness can look at something and see, well, that's pretty distorted. But we're getting to that in a lot of different realities that are setting up now. A lot of different collectives are looking at even the human realities and saying this is distorted and doesn't make any sense. Why do we continue to do this type of thing? So when we get into our soul line realities, it's kind of the same thing, you know. But because we're changing now our dimension we're living from. We're changing our human beliefs. These are massive changes that your human consciousness does not want. And that's why we get the forced change after a while. Because we hold on to realities for years and decades, sometimes multiple decades, that don't work for us. But we hold on to them because we don't know what else to do. You know, it's like, I don't know what else to do here. So I'm going to just hold on to this one and hold on to this one and hold on to this one until there's nothing else I can do. And we do it all the time. And we do it to the point of no return in a sense. So when we start really diving into change and even mapping out what has really changed, if you go into your human realities, and even when we're in our awakening, what's really changing? And when you get into your ascension process, you're going to see a massive difference in how fast things change, how quickly, and how they look so completely different, because you also can't live from the human beliefs anymore. So you're changing your whole belief system, which is remapping your whole body. It's blanking out your whole human template. It's reactivating different DNA with different codes, with a different blueprint. It's not the same thing. It's not the same level of change, if you want to even take it to levels. It is a totally different, because it makes you face every fear you have on a human consciousness level when you walk away from human collectives and you walk away from the beliefs of human collectives. When you really look at the waste that goes on when we are in our human consciousness. And you start thinking about, this is when it can get so massive. You know, we think when we get to certain places in our ascension, we look at all the collectives that are still unconscious on the planet. And they have not gone through their awakening, have not gone through starting their ascension or even in the middle of their ascension processes, which ascension lasts forever. But they're not even in any of those phases yet. You look at what has to happen to completely change the whole planet back to soul line realities. And if we really think the world's going to look like the world looks now, if we think society is going to function like society functions now, it's an unbelievable change that will occur. It has to. You know, because the more people that wake up are going to start to understand we are the plague on the planet in a sense. You know, we will have to eradicate ourselves in a sense. And in a sense, we have to change the consciousness so much that we just don't live that way anymore. We don't live, we're no longer us against nature. We're going to partner with nature, but not partner with nature in a sense we're going to pat it on the head like a child and send it on its way. We're going to actually reciprocate what nature has done for us. We're going to start looking at us as one of the whole thing instead of being on top of the whole thing. We have this, in our human consciousness, we have this belief we're on the top of, you know, the food chain here. And it is kind of funny how we kind of believe that we're, you know, we're controlling everything that's happening. Instead, we're just kind of on a roller coaster ride in general. And we'll see at what point the whole thing starts to derail, because everything will shift. Once your consciousness shifts, everything starts to shift. And then we start to see the big changes. We start to see how we start to pull these realities apart. And we start to really look at what are we, and it's not so much we will shift and change in a way that we even notice it. You just, after so many years, realize you can see how tough it is to fit back in human consciousness and look at it and how it functions, and understand that the more people that pull out of that consciousness, the more people that leave that consciousness, leave that collectives, the whole thing will collapse. Because there won't be enough people to sustain that level of destruction. And when we're talking about that level of destruction, we have to really be honest about, you know, that we played a role in it too. I think a lot of us, when we go through different parts of our ascension, we kind of will get to this place where we're like, oh no, you know, I wasn't involved in that. I didn't play a part in that, but we all did. And we were all in it for ourselves too. There was no part where we weren't. It always was where we were. So you can start to feel a big compassion for humanity because of what it's going to have to go through. Humanity as a whole, because there are so many people. And that's why when we've talked before about different waves of people coming through ascension in different time periods, coming through ascension in different spots, the reason we talk about that is so we all can't come through at the same time. Everything would implode, everything would eradicate because there'd be no one to keep any of the systems going. So you have so many people leaving, every year technically. Every year more and more people start to pull out as they start to really understand and see what's going on. And be able to see beyond just the dimension they're in. Be able to see, years ahead to understand that, yeah, we are pretty selfish. That consciousness is very selfish. But we were selfish too. So we want to observe the collectives. We want to notice what's going on. Notice the shifts, because there are some shifts happening. I feel like a lot of us will kind of get on and we'll talk about all the, I know I do it too, talk about all the things that, we see and we observe different realities and how screwed up they are. But you also do see a lot of people shifting out of disempowerment. You're seeing globally people start to say, that's not okay anymore. Even if it's, like I said earlier, it's distorted in a human way. People are saying that's distorted. But how long were these things able to continue? And our human consciousness didn't even say, yeah, that's pretty distorted. I mean, a lot of these things have went on for years. You can look back in history at some of the most distorted things that happened. But until those collectives really shifted out and called, the human collective said it was distorted. They existed for decades and decades, sometimes centuries. So there are shifts happening. People are starting to shift out. People are starting to ask questions. People are starting to get really into different gateways of consciousness, if you want to say that. There's a huge resurgence in the UAPs and UFOs and alien life. Huge resurgence in that. With what you would say is just, people still functioning from a human consciousness, but it's still activating consciousness. So that's a big deal all of a sudden. There's a lot more compassion coming through. There's a lot more love for humanity coming through. There's still conscious acts from an unconscious place. And we're seeing more and more of that though, but that's where we started too. That's where a lot of us start. I mean, there's really nowhere you can start. You have to start making a conscious act, even if it's still from an unconscious program or an unconscious place. Making a change, even though it's not a massive change, it's a change enough for us to say, look, yeah, I'm making a change here. I'm going to shift into something else. I'm not going to stay in a reality that is this distorted anymore. I want something different. I want to create something else. So we are starting to see it. But the change is not the superficial change. Our universe will continuously move things around on us. But we're still kind of playing on the same chessboard, even though the pieces are getting moved around. It's almost like the old adage, I'm playing chess and you're playing checkers, right? Kind of the same thing. Our soul line realities are playing checkers, and our human realities our soul line realities are playing chess, and our human realities are playing checkers. It's not even, or it's even playing the football game. Our human line realities are not even probably at the checkers board. Because there's so much more going on than we even can understand when we're in it. And when we start to see the change that has to take place and the realities and how they will shift, we start to understand that realities will always have the superficial look of a change, but energetically the big changes will not come until we force them to come. And when I say our universe will force upon us, it's that forced change. Because we can't stay in that any longer. And even when we get forced to change and our reality collapses, we lose a job, we, our spouse, we get divorced, there are deaths that, someone dies, and it seems to turn everything topsy-turvy for us for a while. We feel like it's a big shift. And if we still go back and plug into the old human realities, we really don't complete the shift. We don't really complete the change. We don't use that as a springboard. We'll use it to clear grief. We'll use it to clear sadness. We'll use it to clear and raise our frequency. But there's also most of the time, especially when these things happen, we look for something to ground us back in. You know, we don't want to leave these realities behind yet. We're going to ground back in, whether we ground back in with, typical religion, whether we're going to ground back in with just the human beliefs, which religion is kind of wrapped up in that. We will ground back in and double down back on the human realities. We'll get a new spouse, we'll get a new job. But the reality, energetics of the reality really don't change. What moves that reality forward hasn't changed. The reason we keep getting back in these realities with a very similar type of person hasn't changed. It's still kind of the same thing because we haven't kind of learned why we're there yet. We haven't learned the energetic reason yet. We're still trying to trudge through the reality. Our human realities will do something. It'll keep throwing all this stuff in our way. So as we trudge so much to the human reality, we miss the energetic reality. We're going to miss the forest for the trees. It keeps throwing so many trees in our way, we don't see the forest of what's really going on. And why am I really stuck in this forest to begin with? Why am I concentrating on looking at all these trees and trying to knock down all these trees to get out of here? Maybe I should just kind of, turn back around and walk out. I don't have to go through this, but I'm going through this because I don't know what else to do. I don't know another way yet. So a lot of us trudge through these realities thinking we're really getting somewhere. And, in a way we are getting somewhere. We're just moving at such a snail's pace. And this will make more sense when you're in your awakening, your ascension, and things are moving faster because you're consciously trying to move it quicker. You're conscious to what's going on and you're listening to your consciousness. You're taking what is being said, what you're feeling to do, and you're doing it. And you're noticing things really start to shift. Even though that can take years, but we're not talking decades anymore. I can look back on decades when I was in kind of, one job here, one same kind of job, one right after the other, same type of relationships, one right after the other. You start to kind of see the patterns in what we did, but we did it for so long. And until we start making the sweeping, leaving the human realities and beliefs behind, the radical kind of things you start to see happening. That's why I've had people comment that their new realities are nothing what they thought they would be. And they're not going to be. And that makes us feel like for a while we're doing something wrong. I remember I thought that. I'm doing something wrong because these don't look like how I thought they were going to look. These do not look, I thought these were going to look different. I thought these were going to look like a human reality in some way. And they don't look like that. The people I thought were going to be here aren't here. The money I thought was going to be here wasn't here. It's not saying these things don't come in, but by the time they start coming in, we're not looking for them anymore, and we utilize them differently. That is why they're withheld. They're not withheld to punish us. They're withheld because we would just do the same thing again and again and again and again and again if we were not forced to continue to change to get into a different reality. Once you start your ascension, you're in a way, you're walking away from all our human realities, which means most of the people, the relationships they'll all kind of sever before you leave. The human realities behind money will kind of sever. It'll be done. You can't take money from one dimension to the other. It's like trying to take a magical object, from one dimension to the other. It won't work. It doesn't work that way. You're going to get new money because of how you made the money was tainted. That's the reason why it can't survive in that dimension. The frequency of that energy that's tied to that money is energy. The frequency tied to that is not the frequency you're going in. So we think we're being punished because all of a sudden we're used to having this much money and, this much money, and now we have this much money. We think we've done it wrong. I've missed a step somewhere. Why is this not working out the way I thought it was? Because we can't take it with us. We can't bring all this stuff with us. And we have to, it reminds me of that old movie. I say it's old. I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely as older as 1970s, I guess. The Jerk, when he was leaving and he's taking everything with him. He's like, I'm going to take this paddleboard I'm going to take this phone book, and I need all this stuff. I'm taking all this with me, and this is all the stuff I need to go. We got to do the same thing. We think we need all this stuff. You know, we start taking furniture with us. We start trying to move all this stuff around. And you get to maybe a few years later, I know this last time I moved, I got rid of everything. I didn't want to bring anything with me. I was like, all this stuff has an older energetic signature. I'm going to a different dimension. It's not going to fit in there anyway. I can pay to move it all and then give it away when I get where I'm going, or I can just leave it behind and go. Who really cares about any of it? That's why we stop caring about that stuff. We don't have the nostalgia. We don't have the attachment to any of this stuff anymore, because it just keeps us stuck in dimensions. And when I say it keeps us stuck in the energy, where we can't really get any profound real change, because we're still energetically tied to the old frequencies with all the stuff you want to bring with us. And then you get to a point where you just, you leave the keys to the door in your house and walk away because you just don't care anymore. It's just not worth any of it anymore. You're just not that unhappy yet. That's kind of another old human kind of saying, You're just not that unhappy yet. When you're that unhappy, you'll leave all that shit behind and leave. And you'd see that a lot when people would talk about different relationships they were in, how unhappy they were, but they were going to fight over every little ounce of stuff in the house. They're going to fight over the treadmill. We're going to fight over everything. And then someone would say, well, you're just not unhappy enough yet. Because when you get unhappy enough, you'll leave the keys in the door to the house and walk away, and you're not going to care about any of that stuff. And the same thing happens when you start exiting the human realities. You don't care about the stuff anymore. It doesn't matter. You leave the keys in the door to that reality, and you walk away because you don't care. You don't care if you bring nothing with you. It just doesn't matter, because we don't have the attachment to it. Now, we understand that by immersing all this stuff, the one thing I will say, trying to get rid of it all, that was probably the most dreaded thing to do, trying to get rid of all this stuff you've accumulated over all your human existence, years, living from that consciousness, and you just feel like you can't give it away after a while. You just get rid of it. I just don't want it anymore. So when we start really looking at change, really mapping out change, mapping out what do I want to keep in this reality? Is the sum of the parts really greater than the whole? Some parts of this reality I might like to keep, but the whole reality in general, I don't want to keep. Maybe this person will shift enough to be in this new reality with me. Maybe they won't. The reality itself is kind of like just a training ground, really. It's just helping us clear. It's helping us get to another dimension. All the reality, especially in your human consciousness, they feel like they drag on for decades, because they do. But in our soul-aligned realities, they move a lot faster. They move a lot quicker. We get out of stuff so much faster. We get in the reality, we see what we have to do, we get it done, and we go on to the next one. People who want to come can come, people who don't, they can stay. It doesn't matter anymore. It's a new sense of freedom. It's a new sense of not being tied. You're not even tied to the reality you just built that you thought was soul aligned, and it was for a little while, but now it's something else that's more aligned, that's higher aligned than that one, and we have to leave that one behind. You get very good at that after a while, and you stop judging yourself, which is the big key. Because if we stop judging ourselves, no one else can judge us. If we don't hold judgment, we cannot be judged. No one will shoot that back at us, because we're only judged because we hold judgment. Once we just realize that, these realities are not aligned, I'm going to go to my next one now. But not from escaping something we don't want to deal with in an old one. That's another reason why we stay stuck. And I am going to use that word again. We stay stuck because we kind of want to bail and not deal with it. I don't like my boss. Instead of maybe really rectifying that and trying to resolve that, and maybe I still won't like my boss, but I can get to a point where we can coexist. I still might not care for them, but we can coexist. If I just leave because, I don't like my boss, I'm going to be stuck in another reality that's going to kind of double down on it, because I'm not really dealing with it. I'm just kind of running away from it. There's a difference between dealing with reality and closing it down and running away from it. Running away because, I just want something flashier, or I want something that's going to look a little different. That's not real change. That's just running away. We're going to run away and jump on a different train, but the train's going to the same destination. So it doesn't really matter. You know, I'm not really changing anything fundamental. I'm just changing a little scenery. I'm going to put up some curtains in this reality and call that different. I'm going to throw a coat of paint on it and say, oh, I'm totally changing everything. Look at me changing everything around. You're not changing anything around. You're not fooling anybody. You're not fooling yourself. It's the same thing. It's just got pretty draped up in a new paint job. The reality itself hasn't changed. The energy behind the reality, the reason you're there, hasn't changed. We're just running away from one because we don't like the way that makes us feel. That's the biggest reason we run away. We don't like what the feelings that are coming up. We don't like feeling inadequate. We don't like when we have a boss that makes us feel inadequate. We don't like when we feel like we didn't do a good job or we didn't meet someone else's expectations. We don't like the way that feels. Whether those expectations made sense to us or not, we don't like a sense of failure. That's the biggest thing about a human consciousness. It doesn't like to feel like it failed. You can do a lot of stuff to a human consciousness, but you painted a failure, and that is gut-wrenching because it takes away its identity. Because its whole identity is to be successful. And if it's painted a failure in any aspect of its realities, it will shy away from those realities because, you know, it's almost like an animal that's been scolded as doing wrong. You know, it doesn't want that. It doesn't want to face that. Not only did I do this reality, I created it, and now I'm kind of getting smacked in the face by this reality. Why am I in this reality? We don't want to ask those questions. We just want to jump a train to a new one. So whether you are going for transformational change, leaving human realities behind, and you'll know because everything looks completely different, or we're in incremental changes, or we don't feel like anything's changing, really start to map out, write down what has changed. You know, I went from one job to the other. What has changed here? Let me write that down. How do I feel about it? That's a big thing to see how we're doing in a sense of how much we're upgrading. Is it the same stuff, different day? I mean, I had a friend once that said she'd been through a couple, maybe two different marriages, and she got to this third relationship she'd been in for maybe, I don't know, at that point, maybe 10 or 11 years. And she said, you know, they all end up the same way. Because they were thinking about, I think, divorcing at that point, this last one. And she said they all end up the same way. It's whether am I going to try to resolve it and stay with this one, or I'm just going to cut and run again, because they all end up in the same place eventually. Because the energetics of all those realities is the same. Yeah, they're all going to end up in the same point. What do you do now? Once we reach that, that's a massive reality to understand. It's a massive reality to comprehend that, yeah, these do all end up in the same place. That's a massive springboard in consciousness right there, when you even can see that, you know, all this shit ends up the same way after a while. It doesn't matter who the person I was with was. Eventually they all get to that same point. Can I push past that point? Or am I just going to, you know, in this relationship, I go find another one and ride that out until it gets to that same point again? You know, what is that point? And why can't we get past that point? That's a huge thing to even notice that. Because we're starting to notice there's a pattern, and it's not so much with everyone else. It starts to be a pattern with us because we're the only constant here. You know? Change might be constant, but so are we in this reality and all these realities, and they all end up in the same place. So who's really driving the bus here? Who's really the one controlling it all? When everything's turning out the same way and I'm the only one that's kind of still here. You know, who is behind the curtain here? It's obviously, it's me, because I'm the only one that's still here, and it's still ending the same place. So, all right. That went a lot longer than I thought. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. I think that's it for me today. Unless I have any questions, I'm going to end it there. I have some nice comments today, which is always very nice to get nice comments. Sometimes I don't get those. Sometimes I get those. It's the roll of the dice when you're streaming. Everyone who streams knows that. You never know what you're going to get. I think that's it for me, though. Really evaluate what your concept is of change. What do you consider a big change? What's a small change? You know, where are you with change? You know, I hate change. I always did and never liked it. I'm a very fixed, if we get into astrology, I'm a very fixed sign. You know, I was born under the sign of Taurus. We don't like change. we don't care for it. You know, we will kind of get pushed around until we can't get pushed around any longer, and then we just cut the cord cords on the reality and go. That's a very Taurian thing to do, you know. You don't mess with the bull. You mess with it long enough, and eventually it'll go for the kill. That's just how Tauruses are. And when you're in your human consciousness, that's the Taurus way. You know, people who cross a Taurus long enough realize that eventually that Taurus just will end the whole reality and walk out and never look back. But it takes a lot to get us there. It takes a lot to get us to that point. We have to get completely battered by that reality, but once you push us to that point, we have no reason to ever look back again, you know. Now, as you go through ascension, your astrology sign gets cleaned up a little bit too, you know. It gets taken to the cleaners, it comes back different. But the determination of a Taurus and the perseverance kind of stays the same, which you need during your ascension. So you realize some of the better parts, the best parts of your astrology sign are helping you through your ascension, and the parts that were not so, you know, were not your best side, our best side in those astrologies, they kind of go by the wayside. You know, we don't have that same thing anymore. We operate from a different space. So, okay, I think that's going to be it for me today. So, all right, take a look. The biggest thing we can do is to look at it. If we don't want to look at it, that's when it's going to bite us in the bum every time. Trust me. All right. Bye.